Xena was born in the dry season on the 7th night without rain. The air was already cracked when her first cry entered it. They said the sky turned its face away in mourning. The village priest shook his head. "This one," he said, "has brought silence to the clouds." Her mother died before Xena took her first full breath. Some whispered she had given her life willingly, offering herself to protect the child. But the louder voices called it a punishment, for birthing a girl who stilled the storm. Her father remarried within a year. He needed help, he said, to raise the infant. What he found was a woman whose eyes burned with the hunger of someone who'd spent their whole life chewing bitterness and now wanted to feed it to others. Xena learned early that her presence brought discomfort. That her laughter was too loud, her voice too sharp. She learned it not through words but through the looks. Through the weight in her chest that followed every sound she made. At 6, she tried to sing to her baby cousin. The child smiled, but her stepmother stormed in, grabbed Xena by the arm and dragged her outside. "You want to speak? You want to be heard?" she hissed. She bent down and scooped a fistful of fine gray ash from the hearth. Then she added a generous pinch of red pepper flakes, the kind they stored in sealed gourds, and mixed it together in a cracked bowl. "Kneel," she said. Xena obeyed. "Eat." She stared at the mixture. Her throat locked. But her stomach had known worse. She opened her mouth. The first bite stung. Bitter, sharp, powdery. The pepper hit harder than she expected, clawing at her throat, burning all the way down. Her eyes watered. Her lips trembled. Her tongue throbbed like something had struck it with a stone. But she chewed. She swallowed. Her stepmother smiled. Not with joy, with satisfaction. "Good. That's how you learn." Xena learned. She learned not to speak unless spoken to. She learned that the sound of her own thoughts was safer than the sound of her voice. She learned to stay invisible, to walk without noise, to nod instead of answer. But even silence did not spare her. The ash ritual became regular. It was never called punishment. Her stepmother said it was correction, a way to cleanse her disobedient spirit. Every misstep, real or imagined, led to the hearth. Ash and pepper kneeling on bruised knees. Once she coughed blood. Another time, her tongue swelled so badly she couldn't close her mouth for 3 days. Her brothers saw it happen. They watched. And said nothing. One brother, the second oldest, looked away when she met his eyes. That was the most she ever got. A single glance, then silence. He wasn't cruel like the others. But he wasn't brave either. There were days when Xena couldn't taste anything else. The ash lived between her teeth. The pepper lived in the ridges of her gums. Even clean water carried the sting of it. She began to feel her tongue not as part of her body, but as something separate, a creature she had wronged, one now rotting in her mouth out of spite. When she turned 10, her stepmother made a new rule. If Xena so much as smiled without permission, the bowl would come out. That year, Xena forgot how to smile altogether. The village was not unaware. Women in the market sometimes eyed her stepmother when Xena passed by with fresh burns on her lips. One old basket weaver once muttered, "That child walks like her feet no sorrow." But they did not intervene. Xena had been born under a bad moon after all. The priest had said so. The rain had stayed away for 7 days. That was not something easily ignored. Her father, what of him? He buried himself in yam fields and bottle-gourd wine. He laughed loud at town meetings, loud enough to drown out his daughter's silence. When he saw the bowl in the kitchen, he turned his head. Once he found Xena curled on the floor, her mouth foaming from too much pepper. He stared for a long time. Then walked past her. Xena didn't cry. Not anymore. Crying earned more ash. Instead, she began to dream of wind. Of a wind so strong it would carry the hearth away. Blow the ash into the eyes of those who forced it upon her. A wind that could lift her off the ground and erase every bitter taste. She didn't know where the dream came from, but it came often. And it stayed long after waking. Then came the evening of the visitor. A stranger in a brown cloak stopped at their gate. He carried no bag. No goods to trade. Just a carved stick in his hand and a rusted bell on his waist. Xena was collecting wood when she saw him. The air around him felt strange. Not evil, but sharp. Like breath taken too quickly. The stepmother offered him broth. He declined. The stranger said he was looking for the girl who dreams of wind. Xena's knees locked. She dropped the wood. Her stepmother narrowed her eyes. "We have no such girl here." The man tilted his head. His eyes landed on Xena. "Then why does her tongue rot with ash?" he asked softly. Her stepmother stepped forward, lips curling. She was born cursed. The man smiled, showing teeth filed into perfect points. "That's what they always say. He turned back to Xena. Tell me, child. Do you still taste it? Xena didn't answer. Don't, her stepmother snapped. She's mute unless spoken to by me. The man chuckled. She has been spoken to, madam. By wind. And just like that he vanished. Not in smoke. Not in light. One blink and he was gone. That night, Xena lay awake, her tongue blistered from a fresh punishment. She hadn't said a word, but her stepmother claimed she looked like she was about to. That was enough. But she thought of the man. Of the way he looked at her, like she wasn't just something to be corrected. And then she heard it. Not outside. Inside. A whisper. It came from behind her eyes. Do you want it to stop? Xena clenched her teeth. The whisper didn't press. It waited. Do you want a new mouth? She sat up, heart racing. A new mouth? She imagined one that didn't burn. One that wasn't punished. One that could sing and be heard. Yes, she said in her mind. The whisper responded, then you must feed it. Not with ash. With memory. She didn't understand. But she nodded anyway. The next morning she woke with something wet in her mouth. A small black object. It looked like a seed. It tasted like thunder. She swallowed before thinking. That day she wasn't punished. Her stepmother looked at her and simply passed. The bowl stayed on the shelf. At night she dreamed again. But this time she saw herself standing on the hearth, wind circling her like a cloak. You've tasted enough ash, the voice whispered. Now taste what they tried to bury. Xena didn't know what that meant. Not yet. But her tongue, the one that had rotted for years, felt different. Not healed, but growing. Something was coming. Not just wind, but voice. The days slid past like smoke curling from a dying flame, thin and bitter and hard to hold. Xena no longer counted them by the sun or the moon, but by the number of times her tongue split open after another spoonful of ash. The pepper wasn't even the sharpest pain anymore. That honor belonged to the silence. It buzzed in her ears, behind her eyes, pressing against the edges of her skull like it wanted to speak in her place. She stopped sleeping properly. Every night her mouth throbbed, every morning her pillow was smeared with dried blood. At first her brothers would pretend not to see. But soon even they could not meet her eyes at breakfast. Their bowls clattered louder than necessary, and they kept their backs turned to her. When she opened her mouth to greet them with a smile, a silent one, no words, the youngest boy dropped his cup. He swore he saw smoke rise from her throat. The blistering had become worse. Her tongue, once pink and soft and shaped for lullabies, now looked like something blackened in a hearth, warped and slick, ringed with ulcers that would not close. Every bite of real food was a knife. Bread was gravel. Soup was fire. But still she did not cry. That was the one rule she had made for herself. They may scorch her mouth, they may salt her tongue and claim it wicked, but she would not give them tears. Not a drop. Not when her stepmother watched so hungrily. Not when the ash was spooned out so lovingly. Not when the wind rattled the shutters as if trying to whisper her name. It was the third week when Xena tried to rinse her tongue in the river. She had crept out at dawn, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, barefoot and moving like a ghost. The river was said to be holy, born of the old gods, the ones her grandmother used to tell stories about before she died mysteriously one night after Xena asked too many questions. The banks were slick with algae and the mud cold under her heels, but she didn't hesitate. She knelt, leaned forward, and let her mouth sink into the water. The pain came instantly. The water didn't soothe. It hissed. It boiled against her tongue, searing it worse than the pepper had. The fish scattered like frightened birds. And when Xena tried to spit the water back out, the current pulled some of it down her throat, choking her until she collapsed on the bank, shaking and heaving, river mud clogging her nose. She looked up and saw the water rippling with no wind. And in that ripple for just a moment she saw a face, her own but older and not quite human. The eyes glowed with something silver. The mouth moved but no sound came. Xena blinked and the face vanished. She crawled back home with mud in her hair and a new burn inside her throat. Her stepmother scolded her for leaving the house without permission and made her eat ash for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That night, her dreams were filled with voices speaking backwards. When she woke up, her window had salt on the inside of the glass. Her stepmother began to complain that Xena's presence made the food spoil faster. The eggs curdled. The tomatoes bled white juice. The goat would not go near her and had to be slaughtered because it refused to eat. "Your mouth has cursed the house," the woman said, dragging her by the arm into the storeroom. "Your tongue has made you unclean." Xena was made to sit among sacks of dried beans for 3 days, forbidden to bathe or speak or eat. She accepted it all without resistance. In the dark, she began to hear breathing that wasn't hers. The storeroom held no air, yet her curls lifted as though wind passed through them. When she held her breath, she could still hear breath. When she closed her eyes, she could still see movement. It watched her. Whatever it was, the thing that had appeared in the river, had followed her home. It wasn't always present. But when it was, the temperature dropped slightly. Her skin would prickle. Sometimes the bags of beans shifted as if an invisible animal had darted past. Once she saw writing etched into the dust beside her bare foot. Spirals. The same ones her grandmother used to draw in flour before baking bread. Xena ran her hand over them. They were still warm. By the 4th week, Xena's tongue had darkened to a deep violet, nearly black at the edges. The taste of copper never left her mouth. Her jaw ached constantly. Her voice, when she tried to use it in secret, mouthing words to herself in the mirror, didn't sound like hers. It was lower. Crack. Echoed oddly. The mirrors fogged even when there was no heat. She stopped looking at herself after that. She watched others instead. She noticed things. How her stepmother's shadow often moved half a second after she did. How her eldest brother had stopped sleeping and began talking to the fire as though it were a person. How the cat in the village square yowled and ran away every time Xena passed, even though she never got close. She noticed the sky too. The moon over their roof always seemed a little wrong, too high, too pale. Sometimes it flickered like an old lantern. The birds began avoiding the trees near their home. The ground near the front steps started to sag. And the presence that followed her grew stronger. It had no name. But it was always there when she bled from her mouth, when the pain turned her vision white, when her body bent over in silent agony. It never offered help. But it listened. Always listened. It fed on her silence. One morning, while sweeping the yard as punishment for breathing too loud, Xena felt a pressure behind her ribs. It was not pain. It was potential. Like a scream that hadn't been born yet. She fell to her knees. Her mouth opened. No sound came. But the air shook. The dust on the ground drew patterns around her knees, long thin lines that twisted into shapes that did not belong to any human language. She clutched her stomach. Something was changing. Not in her womb, not in her bones, in her voice. A voice that was not hers was learning her mouth. And it did not want to be quiet. That night, her stepmother tried to force another bowl of ash into her hands. But Xena's hands would not move. Her fingers locked. Her shoulders stiffened. Her head tilted, and her eyes, one brown, one now graying into smoke, stared at the woman with the kind of calm that set the whole room into stillness. The wind outside stopped. The candle died without smoke. A groan came from the walls. Xena did not open her mouth. But her stepmother took a step back. She dropped the bowl. It shattered like glass even though it was wood. Xena turned and walked away without permission for the second time. She went to the river again. This time the river did not hiss. It parted. A path of wet stone formed in the middle of the stream, leading into the forest. The trees bowed low. The presence beside her pressed closer, no longer watching. Now it walked with her. She was not healed. Her tongue still bled. Her taste buds still burned. But her senses, every other sense, were sharpened. She knew things. Knew that her name was not a curse. Knew that the old gods remembered her grandmother's prayers. Knew that silence, when filled with memory, became the loudest song of all. She stepped onto the river path, barefoot and unflinching. Behind her, the house sagged deeper into the earth. And her shadow, which had never quite matched her movements since the 3rd spoonful of ash, turned to follow her without delay. She did not look back. The voice had not spoken yet. But it would. And when it did, the world would hear it. The next time Xena is punished, she doesn't cry. Her stepmother stands over her with the same cracked bowl, filled with soot and crushed pepper seeds, but Xena doesn't flinch. Her knees sink into the ground like it's mud, though the courtyard is hard-packed with sun-baked clay. She takes the bitter ash into her mouth, presses her tongue to the roof of it, and swallows without gagging. It no longer tastes like anything. But it still burns. Her skin sweats and her throat closes up for a moment. Then her mouth opens and for the first time she coughs. But what comes out isn't the usual mix of bile and dust. It's something darker, darker even than the ash. It's thick and curling and alive. The smoke rises from her throat in a steady stream and curls into the air like it's searching for something. It doesn't vanish in the sunlight like breath on a cold morning. It hangs there, twisting, then bends toward her. It takes the shape of a face, not her own. A woman's face, veiled but cracked, and eyes like hot coal. And then it's gone. Xena stares. The bowl slips from her stepmother's hands, shattering on the ground. No one speaks. Her stepmother calls it a trick of the light and orders her to go clean it up, but Xena knows it wasn't light. It was smoke. Real. Alive. That night, as she lies on her mat, the walls begin to shift. Not visibly, not loudly, but she senses it. Shadows bend at strange angles. Smoke curls in the corners, though nothing is burning. She presses her back to the wall and watches. The air around her moves like it's breathing. Then, from under her door, a small finger of smoke creeps in, no wider than a thread of cotton. It dances toward her feet. She holds still. It pauses. Then it writes a single letter in the dust. She stares at it until her eyes blur. When she blinks again, the smoke is gone. The next day, her voice is completely gone. Not just from pain, she has no will to speak. But without words, she hears better. She begins to notice whispers that aren't tied to mouths, and laughter that doesn't come from throats. She walks through the market and sees a woman drop her basket, but before it hits the ground, Xena sees a hand, made of smoke, catch the basket. No one else sees it. The woman blinks and keeps walking. At night, the house fills with strange shapes. Sometimes it's a man standing at the corner of her room, hat smoking like it's on fire but his coat dry as dust. Sometimes it's a child, crawling on the ceiling, head hanging upside down, grinning with teeth made of ash. But none of them touch her. They hover. They watch. They breathe with her breath. She starts coughing often, not from sickness but from trying to hide what wants to come out. More smoke. Each time it escapes her, the shapes grow clearer. They begin to follow her. One curls into her palm and sits there like a kitten. Another loops around her throat like a scarf. When she looks into mirrors, she sees herself, but ringed in them. Silent guards, made of everything she swallowed. Her brothers don't speak to her anymore. One of them crosses himself when she walks into a room. Another starts sleeping with a clove of garlic under his pillow. Her stepmother pretends not to see the black stains forming on the windows. Then one evening, while the sky burns gold and the goats bleat nervously in the yard, the smoke speaks back. She's crouched near the fire pit, waiting for the cassava to boil. It's her turn to cook, though no one will eat what she touches. The fire crackles too loudly like it's whispering. Xena watches the flames, then feels the hairs on her arm rise. The pot shifts. No one touches it. She looks up. There, between the fire and the wood, a woman stands, made entirely of smoke but denser than any she's seen before. Her face is smooth. Her eyes are charcoal pits. Her mouth opens and a sound comes out like old silk tearing. Ashmouth, the woman says. Xena does not move. Ashmouth, the smoke says again, gentler this time. That is the name they gave you in silence. Xena's heart pounds. You have fed on what was never meant for mouths. You have burned not just your tongue but your soul's tongue too. And now you speak our way. The air turns thick. Xena tries to breathe, and when she exhales, a small ribbon of smoke spills from her lips. The woman nods. You are a key little flame. You unlocked the gate they buried. Xena finally finds the strength to gesture, her hand lifting, asking wordlessly, "What gate?" The smoke woman lifts a hand and points to the clay oven at Xena's side. The walls of it crack and from inside comes a groan, not metal or wood but flesh and stone together. Then silence. They baked their sins, the smoke says. Buried them in girls like you. Lit fires to forget. But ash remembers. Xena doesn't understand everything. But her body does. Her blood hums. She feels the smoke now not as a stranger, but as something she's carried for too long, through punishment, through silence, through every darkening wound on her tongue. That night she doesn't sleep. She sits beside the fire pit long after everyone's gone in. The smoke curls tighter around her body. It weaves through her hair, wraps around her arms. She leans forward and draws in the dust with her finger, not letters this time but symbols she's never seen before. Spirals. S. B. She doesn't know where they come from. But her hand moves without her permission. The next morning, her stepmother calls her to the courtyard again. The bowl is ready. But this time, Xena picks it up first. She doesn't kneel. She raises the bowl and turns it upside down. The ash spills onto the ground. What are you doing? Her stepmother snaps, stepping forward. Xena opens her mouth. Smoke pours out. Not gently, it hisses like boiling oil, flooding the air. Her brothers scream and run. Her stepmother staggers back, covering her face. But Xena doesn't move. The smoke wraps around her body like armor. It says only one word. Enough. From that day forward, no one makes her eat ash again. But the smoke follows her everywhere. It curls in her footprints. It dances through her hair. And when she looks into mirrors she sees not just herself, but every girl who ever choked on silence, staring back with mouths full of smoke and names still waiting to be spoken. The dream felt too real to be a dream. Xena stood barefoot on an endless black plain, soft with ash. The sky above was molten, flickering with low fire like the underside of smoldering coals. From the shadows came a woman, her skin the color of soot, her hair trailing embers, her eyes twin pits of quiet fire. She didn't speak with a voice, but with heat that moved through Xena's bones. The woman bent close, lips brushing Xena's infected tongue with gentle finality. "This is not a curse," she said, and her breath was warm smoke. "This is a crown." Then she vanished in a blink of heat. Xena awoke gasping in the cold hut, her mouth tasting of iron, her tongue slick and strange, but the pain was gone. The rot had not spread. Her gums no longer bled when she swallowed. The blisters were still there but sealed over, dry and dark like charcoal. That morning she did not kneel at the fire pit for her usual punishment. Her stepmother had not yet returned from the temple. Her older brother, Orin, simply avoided her eyes. Her younger one, Basie, kept clutching a small prayer stone he'd carved for their mother and wouldn't meet her gaze either. Xena sat in silence, but her silence was no longer empty. It listened. She could feel something still wrapped around her, as if a veil of smoke followed just a pace behind her shoulders. She watched the fire pit in the center of their clay kitchen, and swore it flickered brighter when she breathed. By evening her stepmother returned, with a sour face and a pot full of red yam stew. She dropped the pot near the coals and barked, "Speak out of turn again, Xena. Let me hear one lie in your teeth." Xena didn't answer. But something stirred in her chest, not quite rage, more like warmth rising from deep in her ribs. When she turned away the stew bubbled a little higher. It hissed though no one stirred it. The next day the change began to show. Basie was chasing the neighbor's goat into the garden, laughing, calling it a demon with a beard. Orin was sitting by the wall, sharpening his old knife. Xena walked past him, head bowed, silent. But under her breath, so faint it might have been a hum, she whispered, "Stone slips when blood touches it." She didn't know why those words came. They just did, like smoke from a hidden coal. Hours later, Orin cut himself with his own knife. The blade had cracked just enough to catch his skin. He said nothing. Just stared at Xena for a long time, a line of red dripping from his finger. More words came to her, and each one felt thick in her throat, clinging like soot. She whispered to the wind, and it carried her phrases like embers. "The root in your teeth will rot," she once said, not to anyone, just into the earth. The next day her stepmother spat out a piece of cracked molar while washing clothes. When her stepmother slapped her again, not for speaking but just for being too slow to bring water, something strange happened. Xena didn't scream. She barely flinched. But a moment later her stepmother coughed. Then again. Then bent over as if choking. Her eyes watered. Her hands trembled. "Who put pepper in my throat?" she rasped, though she hadn't eaten. She drank half the calabash of water, still coughing. No one answered. Xena stared at her without blinking. Her lips never moved. But inside her the smoke stirred, pleased, hungry. By the 7th day, people had begun to speak of her differently in the village. They still called her quiet. Still called her odd. But now they said other things too. That animals paused in her presence. That she never blinked when fire burned high. That her bruises no longer turned purple but ash gray. Once, a neighbor saw her crouched beside the river, staring into it like a mirror. And the river stilled. Not rippling, not bubbling, just flat like a black sheet of oil. The woman said she saw something move beneath the water then, something that looked like hands reaching up, but Xena simply walked away, lips sealed. Her tongue was still blackened and her mouth still raw. But it no longer hurt. It felt like a chamber now, like a furnace. More dreams followed. In one, the soot woman gave her a necklace made of burnt feathers. In another, she handed Xena a spoon carved from bone. "Feed only what listens," she whispered. "And only what remembers." The soot woman had a dozen mouths across her body, one on her palm, another on her shoulder, another near her heart. Each one spoke different truths. Xena began carving symbols in the dirt when she was alone. Spirals. Thorny circles. A kind of three-fingered shape with a long tail. Each morning the symbols were gone. But birds no longer landed on the trees around the compound. And shadows clung a little longer than they should. One night, her stepmother accused her of turning the boys against her. "You curse them with silence," she spat. "Your silence poisons my walls." That night she slapped Xena so hard she saw white. But before she could raise her hand again, she winced, clutching her tongue. Her mouth burned. She screamed, What is this?" and ran from the house. Oren and Basie saw it happen. Zina did not speak. She sat, staring at the wall, her hands folded like prayer. In the morning, her stepmother's mouth was blistered, her voice hoarse. She could not eat for 2 days. Rumors spread like dry leaves in the wind. The widow down the road brought her a yam offering wrapped in cloth. Another old woman left a carved gourd by their doorstep. They didn't say it aloud, but Zina could feel the change. They feared her now. But not all fear was cruel. Some fear is reverence, respect. And Zina, quiet Zina with the blackened tongue, began to sit taller. She learned not to whisper full words, but syllables, tones. A hum meant protection. A sigh meant warning. She began to see when others lied, their breath fogged slightly even on hot days. One afternoon she passed a boy teasing a goat. "It won't bite," he laughed. She paused and muttered, "Teeth wait." That evening the boy came back crying, bite marks on his arm. The goat had turned on him. Everyone said he'd kicked it. But Zina knew better. She was becoming something more than girl now. A child of quiet fire. Not loud. Not vengeful. But patient. What had once been ash and pain was now weight and voice. She didn't need her stepmother's permission anymore. She didn't need to shout. Even her silence had teeth now. And the smoke never left her side. The morning smelled like salt and charcoal. Zina woke to the sharp edge of her stepmother's voice slicing through the courtyard, barking orders and threats in the same breath. Her limbs ached, her lips were cracked, and her tongue pulsed with a pain that had become familiar, a throb she had learned to live around. She had been speaking again, only one word whispered in her sleep. Her brother, the youngest one, had heard it. A name, he said. A name that didn't belong to anyone in the household. When he told their stepmother, she did not hesitate. She dragged Zina into the kitchen by her elbow, the grip sharp enough to leave a print, and pointed to the blackened bowl that sat on the ground. "You want to use that tongue so badly?" her stepmother sneered. "Then let it earn its stay." Zina looked into the bowl. It was the same color as every other punishment, gray, gritty ash, heavy with the stench of burnt things. But this time it was different. Mixed into it were sharp fragments, white and glinting. Not salt. Not sand. They looked like broken shells or shards of pottery. Maybe glass. "Eat," her stepmother hissed. Zina knelt slowly, her knees fitting into the familiar grooves of the floor where she'd knelt countless times before. Her palms pressed into the ground to steady herself. She picked up the first handful. Her fingers trembled, not from fear but from knowing. She understood now. The pain wasn't random. It was shaping something. Shaping her. The ash touched her lips. Then her tongue. The burn was immediate, bright and blinding. The pepper flared in her mouth, clawing at the open wounds that never quite healed. But the sharp bits did something worse, they scraped. They tore. Blood mixed with ash. And still she swallowed. The second handful hurt more. A jagged edge sliced the corner of her mouth. She coughed, and it sent a spray of blood mist into the air. Her brothers watched from the doorway, silent and unmoving, the same way they always did. But something flickered behind their eyes. Not pity. Not courage. Something else. The third handful never reached her mouth. Her hand shook too hard. Ash fell to the floor, creating a small dark cloud that hovered for a moment before dispersing. And then the first tear fell. It splashed into the bowl. A second one followed, then a third. Her tears were silent but hot, steaming as they hit the ash. Something sizzled. A low hiss barely audible. Then a curl of smoke rose from the bowl. Her stepmother frowned. "What's that smell?" Another tear fell. More smoke. "Zina," she barked. "Stop that weeping." But Zina didn't stop. She couldn't. The tears came faster now, falling like tiny raindrops into the cursed mixture. And with every drop, more smoke rose. A wind shifted through the room, but none of the windows were open. The flame from the hearth began to sway unnaturally, stretching out toward Zina like a curious snake. Her stepmother took a step back. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Zina said nothing. Could say nothing. Her tongue was torn and bleeding, her mouth dry as old cloth. But her silence was no longer empty. It was alive. The flame twisted out of the hearth. It slithered across the floor, curling around Zina's body. Her brothers gasped and stumbled backward. One of them whispered her name, not in warning, in wonder. The smoke thickened. The kitchen's walls, dark with years of cooking and curses, began to ripple. The wooden shelves groaned. The dried herbs hanging from the rafters caught fire in an instant, bursting into a crown of flames above her head. Her stepmother screamed. She grabbed a bucket of water and flung it toward Xena, but the water stopped mid-air. It turned to steam before it touched her. Xena didn't flinch. The fire around her moved like a living thing, weaving between her legs, wrapping around her shoulders, even threading through her hair without burning a single strand. The rest of the kitchen wasn't so lucky. The shelves collapsed. The pots shattered. The walls blackened and cracked. The table crumbled. And still the fire grew. Xena stood. Her stepmother ran for the door but tripped over the broom she'd left by the threshold. She fell hard, gasping. Xena walked past her, not touching her, not looking down. The fire followed her like a shadow. When she stepped outside, the sky shifted. A wind blew through the village square, thick with smoke. Villagers emerged from their homes, drawn by the scent and the sound. They saw the kitchen engulfed in fire, and a girl stepping out untouched. "She's a witch," someone cried. "No," said another. "She's something older." Xena didn't speak. She couldn't. But the smoke that trailed from her lips said enough. It curled into symbols, into the shapes of things remembered. A cradle, a fire, a mouth full of ash, a crown. The fire behind her roared once more, then began to die. But it did not burn out. It folded into itself, retreating like a bowing animal, until only embers remained. And there, in the middle of the scorched floor, was the bowl. It had not cracked. It had not moved. But inside it now the ash swirled on its own. No wind touched it. No hand stirred it. It moved like breath. Like memory. The villagers whispered among themselves. Some made signs to ward off evil. Others fell to their knees. One old woman wept. Xena stood in the middle of it all, smoke rising from her skin like incense. Her stepmother was nowhere in sight. No one knew if she had escaped the flames or if they had claimed her. And no one asked. Not out loud. That night the village was quiet. No fires were lit for cooking. No songs were sung. Children were told not to speak. Mothers clutched them closer. But Xena walked freely. She passed every house, her feet bare and silent. Where she walked the air grew warmer. The wind whispered her name, not in fear but in warning. Xena. Ashmouth. Fireborn. She walked until she reached the river. She knelt by its bank and dipped her fingers in. This time the water did not recoil. It swirled around her hand, gently, curiously. She cupped some of it and brought it to her mouth. She did not drink. She let it rest on her tongue. It didn't sting. It cooled. And for the first time in what felt like years she smiled. Not because the pain had ended, but because she knew what it had become. The next morning when the sun rose, the village found symbols scorched into their doorways, curved lines, spirals, the shape of a tongue split by fire. They didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But they would learn. Because from that day on, no one in the village ever lit a fire without whispering a name. And not because they feared it, but because they knew she was listening. Xena sat by the broken window, her cracked lips pressed shut, the smell of scorched wood still thick in her hair. The fire had taken most of the house, leaving behind charred beams and a stepmother too afraid to speak. No one touched her anymore. They only watched, from corners, from behind curtains, from the spaces between words. She hadn't meant to speak his name. Her brother, the eldest one, had once dared her to swallow a beetle to prove she was brave. She had done it, crying, and he had laughed. Years passed, and he had watched silently every time she was forced to kneel before the bowl of ash and pepper. That morning as he walked past her and muttered that she still smelled like smoke, Xena whispered his name. Just his name. An hour later he stumbled through the courtyard, coughing violently. His lips turned black, and every time he opened his mouth to curse, soot poured out. He could not eat. He could not drink. It lasted until the sun began to set. Then like the smoke it vanished. She had said nothing to anyone. But something inside her had changed. The next day she sat under the crooked fig tree in the courtyard with a piece of charcoal and a scrap of cloth. She wrote her father's name slowly, each letter shaped with aching care. When she finished, she whispered it like a prayer. Her father sat at the table, speaking with a merchant, when he suddenly paused. His brow furrowed. He touched his throat. Then he asked, "What's my name again?" He asked 3 more times. No one could understand. He forgot not only his name but the names of his children. When the village chief called him by name, he blinked and asked, "Is that mine?" The cloth Xena had written on crumbled in her lap. Not from wind. Not from fire. It dissolved like dried leaves touched by rainless air. That night the smoke returned. It came from nowhere and everywhere, folding itself into the shape of the woman Xena had seen before. She stood by the doorway, her eyes glowing softly, and spoke without sound, the words filling Zena's ears like breath. Each word you lost has found a place in your blood. Zena asked nothing. She understood. What had been taken from her, her voice, her pain, her name, had not disappeared. It had transformed. It had waited. It had grown teeth. She spent the next days alone but not empty. She began to write down the names of everyone who had ever fed her ash. Everyone who had laughed when her tongue bled. Everyone who looked away. Her stepmother. Her cousin who once spat in her water. The teacher who pinched her ear and called her cursed. She wrote them slowly. One name at a time. She did not say them aloud. Not yet. The smoke woman had not told her to. But when she folded the cloth and tucked it into the hole beneath the fig tree, the air around it warmed. The roots shifted slightly. And above, the leaves began to curl inwards, not dying but bowing. When she awoke the next morning, the cloth was gone. No ash. No scrap. Just a faint burn mark on the soil, shaped like a tongue. Zena stood and walked barefoot across the yard. The world felt louder but also clearer. She could hear her name whispered from faraway places, from corners of rooms she hadn't entered, from birds that no longer sang but seemed to watch. She didn't feel like a girl anymore. She didn't feel cursed either. She touched her mouth, which no longer ached. It felt healed. But beneath her tongue, something curled, not pain, not rot, but a word she hadn't spoken yet. A word waiting to be born. Zena stood before them at dawn. The villagers had gathered slowly, drawn not by invitation but by the heaviness in the air, a pressure behind the eyes and beneath the ribs. It had rained during the night, yet the earth was already dry. The shrine's drums had not played. The fire pits remained unlit. Even the crows, noisy creatures, were absent. And there she stood, the girl with no voice, no smile, no tongue worth twisting into sweetness. Her mouth was closed, but her eyes were wide. In the crook of her elbows, the ash from yesterday's festival clung like a second skin. Her hands trembled only slightly. Just enough to remind everyone that she was still human. The stepmother pushed to the front, eyes wild, clothes half-tied. "What are you doing?" she shouted. "You think this is your day too? After all you've—" Zena opened her mouth. There was no scream, no cry, not even a whisper. Just smoke. Thick and slow like breath that had waited too long. It spilled from her mouth, rising in curls, coiling like snakes, like memory given form. The smoke twisted midair, not gray but almost gold. At first it was silent. Then it began to hum. Then it began to speak. But not in Zena's voice. The first voice was cracked and old, full of splinters. Asterisk, I was sewn shut for saying a priest's name. My bones lie beneath the grain stones. Ask your uncles. Asterisk. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The second voice came young and broken. Asterisk, I bled in a wedding cloth and they called it ruin. But my blood sang. I sang even when they burned my feet. Asterisk. Zena did not move. Her mouth remained open, the smoke still pouring. A third voice came. Asterisk, I was mother to 2, midwife to 10. When I spoke of dreams, they drowned me in the river. But I still dream. And now you hear me. Asterisk. The villagers began to weep, not all, but many. Some covered their ears. Others stared as if struck. The stepmother fell to her knees, eyes glazed. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Another voice rose. Asterisk, your house smells of my skin. You wear my jewelry, call it family. But I was fed ash and salt until I forgot my own name. Asterisk. A long, low moan came from the side of the shrine. One of Zena's half-brothers was rocking back and forth, face streaked with soot. Zena's other brother ran. He didn't make it far. He stumbled near the pepper trees, where the smoke wrapped around his legs like a tether. He screamed and dropped, face to the soil. Above them, the sky began to darken. It was not yet evening, but the sun blinked as if something vast had passed before it. The air cooled unnaturally and every sound, the insects, the birds, even the shuffling feet of elders, went still. Zena's mouth moved slightly but no sound came from her. Her tongue, small and pink, dangled by a thread of sinew. And then gently it fell. A gasp swept the crowd. She made no move to catch it. Instead she raised her chin. And more voices came. Asterisk, I died with secrets in my throat. She carries them now. Asterisk. Asterisk, I was never given a grave. She is my ground. Asterisk. Asterisk, I told the truth once. They tied my tongue in oilcloth. I live in her now. Asterisk. One of the oldest women in the crowd, blind and hunched, reached for Zena's hand. "You're the smoke child," she said. "You are what they feared. What they tried to hush." Xena did not respond, but the smoke curled around the woman's fingers, soft as a blessing. At the edge of the crowd, someone dropped a match. The flame caught nothing. Xena stepped forward. Her stepmother sobbed openly now, her body trembling with a fever that no medicine could break. "I didn't know," she kept saying. "I didn't know I didn't." But Xena passed her without looking down. Behind her, the shrine cracked. A piece of its carved roof slid loose and shattered on the ground. The elders knelt. Not to the gods. Not to the ancestors. To Xena. To the one who had no tongue. No one said her name. They didn't need to. She had too many voices now. It began the morning after she left. The stepmother woke to ash on her pillow, not gray but deep black, fine as ground bone. She tried to cough but no sound came. Her mouth opened wide, her tongue moved, her throat flexed, but the silence was absolute. Her screams stayed inside her head, echoing against her teeth. The father sat at the hearth trying to light a fire. He had been at it for hours. The match would strike. The kindling would catch, for a second. Then nothing. Not even warmth. Just smoke that disappeared the moment it rose. And then there was the water. The family bucket, drawn from the well each morning, was brackish now. It looked clear but it bubbled strangely. And whenever someone drank from it, their mouth filled with the flavor of salt, rust, and something else, something rotting. By the second day, every corner of the house was dusted with ash. By the third, the stepmother's voice was gone for good. By the fourth, the father stopped eating. He tried. But each time he chewed, he gagged. The food tasted like cinders. They tried everything. The old priest came and waved his goat-tail whisk. He poured oil and chanted. But the moment he uttered a lie, "There is no curse here," he said, the air twisted hot. A wind gusted through the sealed windows. His mouth filled with pepper. He spat until his gums bled, then fled, never returning. Xena's half-brothers left next. They had stayed in silence, watching the house rot from within, pretending it was only a bad season. But one night, the younger whispered to the elder, "She's watching us." They'd heard nothing, seen nothing. But something in the walls responded. The wooden beams moaned like grief. The next morning they vanished. The house was no longer a home. It began to shift in small ways. Things moved without touch. The mirrors fogged when no one bathed. Windows refused to open. At night, footsteps echoed down the halls but no one walked. In the kitchen, if anyone whispered a lie, even a harmless one, the air would turn acrid. Their mouths would burn, their eyes would water, and they would cough until they bled. One servant lied about Xena's whereabouts, said she saw her in another village. She choked until she passed out. When she awoke, she packed and left without even collecting her wages. In the corner of the house where Xena used to sleep, ash rose on its own. Not falling, but rising like smoke reversed. The ash formed vague shapes, wings some said. Others saw hands. And once, the father swore he saw a mouth open in the air, full of red-hot teeth. The stepmother could no longer speak, but she tried to write. Letters asking Xena to return, to forgive, to cleanse what she had marked. But every time she pressed pen to paper, the ink would vanish before it dried. She tried charcoal, blood, even spit. Still nothing held. The paper always came back blank. One day the father crawled to the threshold where Xena had once stood. He remembered her silence. Her eyes. The way she'd looked at them, not with hatred but with distance, as if they were already fading. He begged, wordless, broken. But the threshold remained cold. And from it rose a gust of ash that covered his face, filled his ears, and left him blind for hours. That night they tried to leave the house. But the doors would not open. Not until sunrise. And even then, when they stepped outside, their clothes were full of soot. The village children screamed and ran. The elders turned their faces away. No one invited them in. No one wanted the curse to follow. The house remained. Windows dark. Curtains unmoving. The roof sagged like it was tired of standing. And inside, every time someone, guest or resident, dared speak a falsehood, even a little one, the taste returned. The sharp bite of pepper, the bitter rot of forgotten things. And the ashes stirred, as if waiting. Years passed, and the village changed its seasons quietly, as though trying not to disturb something sleeping just beneath the soil. They never rebuilt the house where Xena had lived. No one dared. It collapsed on its own one rainy season, and from the rubble a tree grew, tall, black-barked, with no leaves even in spring. It smelled faintly of pepper and wood smoke, and birds never nested in its branches. No one cut it. No one climbed it. The elders said it had grown from silence, not seed. Children began leaving offerings at its roots. Bowls filled with white ash, carefully sifted from their mothers' hearths, and pinches of red pepper stolen from kitchens. No one told them to. No one had to. They called it feeding the silence. The tradition passed from one group of children to the next, a game and a ritual all at once. They say she once ate nothing but ash, a girl would whisper as she crouched by the tree. She never cried, another would reply, peering into the bowl as though waiting for it to empty itself. And now she eats lies, a boy might say. That's why you never lie near the tree. They never saw Xena, but they spoke of her like she had just passed down the path. Some swore they felt the air shift when they said her name, a soft heat, a scent of burning cloves, a taste of dust on the tongue. In schoolyards and market stalls, a new phrase bloomed like moss: Xena walked past me. People said it when someone spoke a hard truth. When a child told her teacher she didn't steal the coin and the teacher believed her. When a man confessed his envy before his brothers. When a widow spoke her husband's name aloud after 5 years of silence. Xena walked past me, they said. It meant the silence had been honored. It meant the smoke had listened. The girl herself had become a story, a presence, a border. No one knew where she went after the house fell. Some said they saw a figure in the hills once, face veiled in gray cloth, walking barefoot through the old war paths. Others said she lived among the dead, whispering to buried bones. Some swore she became the tree, others that she wandered, that she walked only where she was needed, where someone had been silenced for too long. Injustice became quiet after that. Not gone. Not defeated. But quieter. When someone tried to beat a child in secret, the fire would not light that night. When a husband raised his hand in fury, the pot boiled over, and the smell of burnt pepper filled the air. When a chief took too much grain from the stores, his mouth filled with soot until he spat and wept in front of the entire council. No one could prove Xena was behind it. But they believed. And that was enough. The tree remained. On stormy nights, it swayed without wind. On dry days it bled sap like tears. Once, a man tried to cut it for firewood. The axe had snapped. His house caught fire 2 days later. He left the village and never returned. No one told these stories officially. No priest spoke her name. But the women did. The quiet ones. The girls who had been told not to speak too loud. The ones who watched and remembered. They gathered at the tree sometimes when the moon was thin. They brought ash and pepper. They sat in silence, not praying, not chanting, just breathing together. Feeding the silence. One night, a baby girl in the village refused to cry for days. They took her to healers. No one could explain it. Then a little boy carried her to the tree and whispered, "She doesn't need to cry. She's already been heard." The next morning the girl laughed for the first time. And still no one saw Xena. But when smoke curled upward from a hearth that hadn't been lit, when the truth rang loud in someone's mouth and the crowd listened instead of punishing, when silence swelled in a room like a warm breath, people paused. They said nothing. They looked toward the tree. And they knew. She is near.